Fruit Loops were one of my favorite things to eat when I was a kid. I thought this was the perfect breakfast, and if you asked me back then, I'd probably tell you it's also the perfect lunch and dinner. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone on that one. But guys, I have bad news. We've all been living a lie. Not only do all Fruit Loops in the bag taste exactly the same, yes, that's right, there's no difference between the colors, but here is the kicker. If we head over to the official Kellogg's website, we find Fruit Loops, and then we hit nutrition facts. Now let's head over to ingredients, and we're gonna get corn flour, sugar, flour, starch, oil. Yeah, well, guess what? Fruit Loops contain exactly 0% fruit. Although to be fair, the formula is a bit different over here in Europe, so if you check out this German box of Fruit Loops, you will find that they do indeed contain trace amounts of fruit extracts, mostly for coloring. Wow, Kellogg's, big deal, big deal. You know what? I find that unacceptable. So for this video, I asked myself, is it possible to use actual fruits to make Fruit Loops at home? And even though the process is everything but easy, involving quite a few steps to get close to what we are familiar with in terms of color, texture, and flavor, I managed to come up with these Fruit Loops that are indeed almost 50% fruit and definitely 100% natural ingredients. I'm gonna show you exactly how I achieved these, but the thing is that, yes, of course I took a few nibbles here and there while testing and shooting, but I have never actually tried this final batch with milk, and definitely not side by side with the commercial original version, I guess. I'm very excited to try those towards the end of the video, but first, let me ask you one thing. How did cereal, which is supposed to be this healthy, wholesome breakfast, turn into this literal wall of sugar you find at your local supermarket? And you know the drill, guys. On this channel, you come for the recipe, but you stay for the story. And this one, sex, greed, deception, this one has it all. Let me explain. To understand the history of breakfast cereal and to understand how it became what it is today, we need to go back all the way to Industrial Revolution era USA. Back then, there was one specific social movement that was gaining more traction by the day, and it was called the temperance movement. Its main goal was clear and simple: to oppose the consumption of all alcoholic beverages. You gotta understand, drinking all day, every day was definitely a big thing back then. I mean, people were having a glass of booze as medicine when they had a cold and stuff like that, including children, by the way. But guess what? Tons of people were also getting sick from and addicted to drinking alcohol. Now add to that the fact that all of a sudden there were these big new factories popping up everywhere with huge furnaces, fire, heavy machinery. Probably not a great idea to be drunk there, but people definitely were. So yeah, that's how you get yourselves a big, serious wave of anti-drinking activism. And the church back then was playing a huge role in this movement, sort of spreading the word, but also accepting people's sobriety pledges in front of God. And so one notable person who was part of this so-called temperance movement was a church preacher named Sylvester Graham. He had a pretty complicated life growing up. You know, at some point he was working in a tavern to make some money, and it was there where he was witnessing people get shit-faced drunk and fight, sometimes until they're dead, every single day. And Sylvester Graham was like, that's gotta stop. But for Graham, abstinence from alcohol is definitely not where he stopped. He went much further than that. In his belief, humans were constantly surrounded by evil temptations. Literally anything that was pleasurable or stimulating in any way was bad. And that included, of course, alcohol, but also many more things like, for example, a hard bed or a warm bath. And in terms of food, he was convinced that humans should only eat plants. Okay, that's not too bad. Maybe even ahead of his time. Oh no. You see, any kind of spice or flavoring you would add, no bueno. Your food, young friend, must be pure, wholesome, and taste like nothing, so you live a long and pleasureless life. But here's the kicker. According to Sylvester Graham, if you followed all of his extremely soft-core advice, you will chill the hell down, stop having impure thoughts, and thus, I'm not joking, I'm not making this up, you will finally stop masturbating. That was literally Sylvester Graham's ultimate goal. And his arch enemy, he wrote entire books about that, was white bread. To him, white bread was the devil himself coming to you in the shape of a delicious bun. But he didn't actually hate all bread. It was just white bread that he hated. In fact, he thought that the main staple of your diet should be a very, very simple whole grain bread made from a very coarsely milled flour that would later on, actually after his death, become known as Graham flour. Because yes, even though Sylvester Graham was harboring a lot of beliefs that today we would simply just call crazy, back then he actually had quite a lot of followers. They might have been a little bit less extreme than him, but they definitely carried his ideas well into the late 19th and even into the 20th century. Those are the people who brought us foods like the graham cracker, for example, which is like quite popular to this day and still made with something similar to Graham's graham flour. But wait, how does all of that relate to breakfast cereal? Well, good question. Back to the mid-1800s. Sylvester Graham had now passed away, but his ideas, as we mentioned, are alive and well. A very fine 19th century dude named James Caleb Jackson, for example, he was running a spa kind of thing. They called it sanatorium back then. Basically a place where you could go, relax, hang out, do some water healing, whatever that was, and also live Jackson's vision of a completely stimulation-free life, inspired of course by Sylvester Graham. And don't think he was some kind of like niche freak. He was actually running one of the world's biggest spas back in the day. Jackson was a pretty devoted follower of Graham's food philosophy, and it was at his spa that we find the very first recorded mention of something called granula. Not granola, granula. This was sort of Jackson's take on Graham's simple whole wheat bread, except this one was double baked, so it would get really, really hard. Then they would break it into nuggets, and then because they were so hard, you had to soak them in milk overnight, and then you could have them for breakfast the day after. And this simple but somewhat wholesome and novel food, it really became a thing. Jackson started selling it big time, and only a few decades later you'd find DIY recipes for granula in all sorts of cookbooks. One of the people who was clearly quite fond of this idea was another fine 19th century dude, and his name might actually ring a bell. It's John Harvey Kellogg. Let me just say, John Harvey Kellogg was not a simple man. According to Wikipedia, he was an American medical doctor, nutritionist, inventor, health activist, eugenicist, and businessman. And if you read up on Kellogg's actual views and what he believed and tried to carry into the world, it's insane. John Harvey Kellogg was a ridiculous anti-sex crusader and a racist. But on the other hand, he did invent cornflakes, so although it's not actually that easy, I mean the cornflakes part. Everything else, clear as day. You see, at Kellogg's spa, you would actually get a slightly improved granula. Kellogg was actually using a blend of different grains, but most importantly, he kind of tweaked the process to tenderize them. And apparently the patients at his spa liked that stuff so much that they were literally begging Kellogg to sell them some, which, yes, that is what launched his career as a food inventor and producer. He teamed up with a few of his siblings and other members of his family, and together they developed an even better technique to make something they would call flaked cereals, which is what eventually would get them the game-changing patent in 1896. Even though it's John Harvey Kellogg's name on the patent certificate, many people argue that it was actually his younger brother, William Keith Kellogg, who was the mastermind of the company. It was Will Kellogg's idea, for example, to start making corn-only flakes, and that was quite revolutionary because corn was mostly used to feed animals back then and therefore was a hell of a lot cheaper. And I'm gonna argue that it was exactly this sort of capitalist instinct of Will Kellogg that eventually led to the big Kellogg's fallout. I hope you remember that thus far, all of the cereal we've talked about was specifically designed to taste so bland that you will experience zero stimulation while eating it, so you will finally stop touching yourself. Which, by the way, if you check that old cookbook from before, people were totally just adding sugar and fruits into it. And William Kellogg was a smart businessman. He just knew that stuff, and so he had a suggestion. How about we add some sugar into our cereal? But that was a big no-no for John Harvey. Too much flavor, too much pleasure. The thing is that William Kellogg was a lot less interested in promoting weird, dogmatic, purist lifestyles and much more interested in, how should we say it, cold hard cash. So a huge family fight erupts, and eventually Will Kellogg founds his own company which does add sugar to cornflakes, and guess which one of the two companies grows into the one big company that we know today as Kellogg's that produces these? That's right, easy question. It was of course Will Kellogg's Kellogg's. I think it's safe to say that in terms of breakfast, the 20th century in America and quite a few other countries around the world becomes all about cereal. And think about it, before the rich would eat eggs and meat for breakfast and the poor would eat some form of porridge. But all of a sudden you get this tasty and healthy stuff that comes right out of a box. All you gotta do is to add milk, and most people can afford it. Almost everybody likes it, so of course cereal became a game changer. Innovations and new brands start appearing everywhere. Grape nuts, puffed rice, Wheaties, of course the legendary Cheerios, they all take America by storm. Kellogg's does become a household name, but it is far from being the only name on the market. In fact, it has some serious competition. So after World War II, which was a little bit of a break, life in America kind of starts getting back to normal, except now we have a whole generation of baby boomer babies about to become the new population. And all the cereal companies can think of at this point is, if we get those kids early, they're gonna become lifelong customers. And so the cereal race is on. And what does the Kellogg's company do to boost sales? Well, the one thing that has worked for them once before, adding sugar. But this time they got TV to tell everyone about it.
Faster than Kellogg's exciting new cereal, Sugar Frosted Flakes. Big crunchy flakes of corn with sparkling sugar on every flake, and always ready to eat. All you need is milk or cream, or eat them right out of the box.
I'm just gonna argue that by introducing Sugar Frosted Flakes, they dropped the word sugar from the name later on, Kellogg's turned the cereal race into a sugar race. Their competition, of course, followed, introducing more and more brands like Frosty O's, Sugar Jets, Quisp, Monster Cereal, Cocoa Pebbles, you name it. But the crazy thing is, even though these products became highly processed and loaded to the brim with sugar, they were still marketed as the healthy breakfast option. And unfortunately, it took government agencies quite a long time to finally start setting some rules on how cereal companies can describe, market, and call their products. And when they finally did, that ship had sailed a long time ago. All people wanted, especially kids, were brightly colored and absurdly sweet cereals. Which is extremely ironic if you consider what the original intentions of Graham, Jackson, and Kellogg were. It was only in this 21st century that mainstream consumers started slowly considering more healthy cereal options for breakfast. Like, for example, there's the comeback of mildly sweetened actual granola, or the rise of muesli, which is of course the slightly healthier European cousin of American breakfast cereal. But I was a cereal eating kid in the early 90s, so I definitely remember craving the brightly colored and sweet stuff. And one of the brands I remember liking the most are, of course, Froot Loops. Turns out they've been around since the 1960s with originally only 3 colors, that's yellow, orange, and red, with purple, blue, and green being added later on. Now, funnily enough, these are modern day German or European Froot Loops with only 3 colors, because apparently Europeans are less willing to accept neon colored cereals, I guess. But as we've learned, it doesn't even matter because they all taste the same anyway. Now, with all of that history in mind, I know that was a big one. I told you I did some research to see if we could come up with a version of homemade Froot Loops that A, are 100% natural, and B, where each color will correspond to a different flavor. The goal was not to make them taste like the original or super amazing or whatever. The goal was to see what a wholesome homemade Froot Loop could actually taste like. And for that, let's begin with the cereal part. We're mostly going to be using oats, but we'll also add some all-purpose flour, which contains gluten and will help the structure, as well as finely milled corn flour, which I think has the signature mildly sweet note that you get with most cereals. The oats, of course, are way too coarse, so we're first gonna put them in a blender and turn them into a fine oat flour. After combining all the grains together, we do want to add a little bit of sugar, just a tad. I mean, come on, we want this to taste like something. We balance those out with a bit of salt, and I also added baking powder, which will work as a leavener to help us get an airier texture. Whisk until homogeneous, and that is our Froot Loop cereal base mix. The next part will be actual fruits. I want to go for 4 different colors, so here are 4 different flavors. For red, I'm gonna go with cherries. All I could find were frozen cherries because they're kind of out of season now. Then apple and kiwi will be our green flavor. Blueberry will make, a blue Fruit Loop, I hope. And then for the yellow one, I went with orange and mango. The first step will be to turn them into a puree. For that, I'm adding them to a blender with a drop of vegetable oil. My thinking with the oil here is that as we blend everything together, it's gonna emulsify into the puree and carry more of the fruit aroma. That's because fat is actually much better at absorbing and storing fragrances than water. You can also add extra color for a brighter punch, and a great natural yellow coloring is turmeric, but nuh-uh. I highly recommend not to use turmeric in plastic or wooden cookware because it's gonna stain everything yellow, like brightly yellow, and you will never ever fully get it out. So we're gonna blend everything into a sort of smoothie. You see how it's getting kind of pale? Well, once we add turmeric in a glass bowl, by the way, not anymore. We'll do the same to apple and kiwi, and as a green food coloring, I'm gonna be using chlorella, which is a seaweed extract. You could also use a bit of pureed spinach as a coloring, I suppose, but what you're seeing here is a deep ass green you're never gonna get with those. The cherries actually turned out to be the easiest. They don't even need any extra color. They already look Tarantino red as they come. But now the blueberries, they're a highly interesting case because as you blend them, you'll notice that their juice is indeed not blue at all. And that posed a highly interesting challenge because what natural food coloring is there that is actually bright blue? Blue is a color you almost never find in edible things, like naturally. Except there's this one ingredient, and only one that I know of, that can actually do the job. Enter the mysterious butterfly pea flowers. These are a variety of blossoms from the Clitoria plant, which gets its name from its particular shape. Now, these are found in parts of Asia, and when you add hot water, you can get a tea with an incredibly unique color and a very boring taste, but that's not what we're here for. I mean, check that out. If you think that looks fake, wait until you see what happens if you add a drop of anything acidic in there. Exactly. But I did not just show you that trick simply because it looks cool. I mean, I kind of did. But here's the thing. Most fruits, and that of course includes berries, are actually slightly acidic or a lot acidic, and that's gonna mess with our results. That's on top of the fact that we already have the purple color of the blueberries to work against. So, in addition to adding a bit of super strong butterfly pea tea, I'm also gonna add a little bit of baking soda, which of course is alkaline, to counteract the acidity. I know this still looks very purple, but don't worry, it's gonna mellow out as we move along. So, with our 4 different flavors and color purees all set, it's time to turn them into a sort of dough. Simply add an equal amount of cereal base mix by weight and combine into a homogeneous mass. The colors will all change a little bit at this point, especially check out the blueberry. It literally goes from purple to blue in front of your eyes as you lower the overall acidity by mixing it with the grains. The doughs are obviously way too sticky at this point to do any kind of meaningful work with them, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna shape them into sheets and pre-cook those so they firm up. For that, you want to get a couple of small trays and grease them. I used coconut oil. Then use a wet offset spatula to spread a thin layer of Fruit Loop dough on each of the trays. Keep it nice and flat and even, somewhere around 2 to 3 millimeters. Now to cook them, we need to basically drop them in a hot water bath, which requires a bit of creativity. I used a deep casserole pan and put that straight on my stove, which is a bit more adventurous than what I'm comfortable with, but hey, it worked. Now, drop your sheets in one by one and let them cook through, roughly 7 minutes each. Half of our mixture is starch, which gelatinizes around 80 degrees Celsius, so that's all we're looking for at this stage. You could technically try doing this in the oven, but the boiling water actually provides a very consistent and even heat transfer with a maximum temperature of 100 degrees, which is perfect. You're gonna need to rest the pre-cooked sheets of Fruit Loop dough in the fridge for like 30 minutes or so to let them fully settle and firm up. After which we're gonna get to what is undoubtedly the most laborious part of this process, the shaping. You will need 2 ring-shaped objects to use as stencils. I picked the lid of a chapstick for the big loop and then a metal straw for the small one, and then you get to work. The loops you're gonna get are still very soft and will also taste pretty floury and not very great. So your very last step is gonna be to toast these in the oven, super low temperature, somewhere around 125 Celsius, because we want pretty much zero browning on these to keep the nice and bright colors. It took me around 45 minutes to get these nice, dry, and toasty without burning them. And if they're still a little bit soft on the inside, then turn your oven to an even lower temperature, like 60 degrees maybe, and just like let them dry up and firm up for like another half hour. Or if you want to be extra safe, you can put those in a dehydrator, but the oven should work just fine. Now let's actually get to the final resolution of my Froot Loops journey, which is of course tasting my homemade Froot Loops with milk. Well, since I had to make each one of those by hand, I don't have that many, and that's the reason why I'm gonna go over to the other camera now and pour some milk over them to show you guys, because I don't have enough to make a separate close-up. So here they are, and now I'm gonna pour some milk over them. Ooh. Look at those! Those are homemade Froot Loops! Okay, here I am back with my demo cereal, and then here we of course have the opponent, which is the commercial Froot Loops, Kellogg's Froot Loops. I think the first thing we all notice immediately is the difference in color. The commercial ones are like neon colored and bright, while the homemade ones are, I mean, you can clearly tell the different colors, but they're much more mellow. I'm gonna establish a baseline by testing the commercial product first, so cheers. Yeah, Froot Loops, classic. That's the flavor I remember. It's like this very nondescript general fruit flavor, which I'm just gonna call generic citrus or something. Quite sweet, but not too bad actually. But now the big question is, of course, how does the homemade cereal stack up? And I have not tried this with milk, like for real. First of all, it tastes like actual cereals, like porridge or something, and it also tastes like fruit. So that one, I think we achieved. I'm getting some actual cherry flavor. Why am I so surprised? The more I eat, the better they taste, for sure. So I'm gonna say that the biggest difference between these two is actually not so much in flavor. I mean, they obviously taste quite differently, but I would say like the homemade ones are still recognizable as Froot Loops when you eat them. But the biggest difference is in texture. The commercial ones are just extremely light and puffy, you know, almost like puffed rice. And they do indeed undergo that kind of processing during manufacturing. The problem is that this involves some pretty complex machinery with like high pressure and yada yada, which I didn't want to go there for this video. I tried to get around that one, but obviously even with baking soda, we would have needed more puffiness in the homemade Froot Loops. But other than that, I mean, they're Froot Loops, they're all natural. They get soggy in milk anyway, so what's the difference? I think I'm starting to get the difference. You need to chew a lot longer. But hey, the upshot is they actually taste like fruit. Yes. Not all the fruits are equally prominent. Mango comes through pretty well, and definitely cherry. Not getting a lot of apple, and also not getting a lot of blueberry, unfortunately. But I'm getting a lot of wholesome oat flavor. Final verdict, would I recommend doing this at home? I'm not sure. Maybe not. I mean, it's a lot of work, and you don't get a lot of Froot Loops doing that. And then when you do, they don't even, I mean, they taste good, but it's like, it's not the same craveable experience. So yeah, maybe if you want healthy Froot Loops, just buy some healthy granola and add some fruit, like some actual fresh fruit, and you're gonna be just fine. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.